and Khalid, Missouri.
Right, I'm going to start with the background of my case. 2nd of October 2007. It's a Tuesday, and in a block of flats called Studland Estate in Stockwell, about 5 or 10 minutes walk from my office, some kids are hanging out in the stairwell, smoking cannabis, just relaxing. It's just before midnight, and another guy comes along who's one of the fellow's friends. And as he comes to the communal door outside the flat, he looks to his left and he sees two guys on their bikes, just bicycles, with their hoods up. And he knows something's up. And he bangs the door and he says, "Quick, quick, open." And his friends, including the victim, jump up, open the door. You can only open it from the inside. And the boy rushes in, but unfortunately they didn't close the door. One of the cyclists ran, opened the door, pulled out what we believe to be, or what the experts said was a MAC-10, and pointed it towards these young men. They sprinted up the stairs, some of them got up to the 4th and 5th floor, and then they heard two shots. They got to the top, and they realised one of them wasn't there. They went back down to the 3rd floor, and their friend was tragically on the floor, having been shot once in the leg, the first shot, and then the second shot through the back, the fatal shot, which tragically killed him. He died at the scene. 2 days later, they arrived at my client's address. My client's 17 years old, and police intelligence has led them there. They understand that my client is in a gang, and that gang has a problem with this group of young men in terms of the turf war, and that is what has led them to the door. But there isn't much evidence, not much evidence at all. There's no forensic evidence linking him to the scene. There's no forensic evidence linking him to the bullets. They never found a gun. There's no mobile phone cell site evidence to put him at the scene. There is hardly any evidence at all, apart from some identification evidence. Now, there is some CCTV footage. Funny enough, there was a closed circuit camera outside the premises, but all it showed was a chap in a hood, quite a blurry image. Again, the jury were not permitted to look at the image for the purposes of identifying the defendant because it was just too unclear. That didn't stop them though, and they were told by the judge not to do so. The identification, if I can sum it up, was this. One of the witnesses was put on a parade involving one of the other assailants, and he picked out someone, a volunteer, and when he got out of the parade he said, "I thought that was the gunman I was supposed to be identifying." So they've realised there'd been a mistake, and they went back in and did a parade with my client on, who was alleged to be the gunman, and he picked him out. Now, you might think that's pretty good evidence, but actually it's not, because it shows that the witness isn't very careful. He's willing to pick out a volunteer as the gunman, so not very good at all. The second identification witness did pick out my client, but he said he was only 90% sure. Reasonable doubt means that he's really not a very good witness at all. The other one, who knew my client, who saw the gunman, went on an identification parade and said the person who's the gunman isn't on that parade. But the police put him in a car with one of the others, the one who I actually identified him after picking out a volunteer. And what happened during the car journey was this person who picked out my client was yelling, yeah, I picked out the man, I picked out the gunman, it was JJ, yeah, it was JJ. And he said this in the presence of the police officer and the brother of the victim. Now, the brother of the victim had said, had been on a parade involving my client and said, the gunman isn't on this parade. A few days later, the police decided to go and visit the brother, and they said to him, "You know JJ, you know him really well, my client. How come you didn't pick him out?" He said, "Well, I don't know." Anyway, 3 days after that visit by the police, what do you know? He's had a flashback. It's my client. I remember now. It's all come back to me. It's JJ. And that was the Crown's evidence. But they found a phone at my client's address. And the phone evidence was this. They connected a number, they found the number of the phone, and when they went on his contact list, the number was connected to a name, which unfortunately was Killer. All right, so my client's labelled as Killer on the phone. And then, within some draft messages on his phone, they found a bundle of unsent texts, which are actually rap lyrics. Now, I've got them here. Maybe if I just distribute them now as I go along. I'm not going to ask you to read them all right now, because obviously I'll run out of time. But the rap lyrics were problematic in the sense that they indicated a liking of violent rap. Rap involved in things like Mac 10s, Chrome 9s, shooting people, riding on a mission, that kind of thing. So you had all these references. Now, I looked at it straight away, and I thought to myself, so what? I've loved hip-hop from a very young age, and I like to think I know quite a bit about hip-hop. And my first impression was that, well, this is just a young guy who's trying to make maybe a rap career for himself, an amateur rapper, someone who's expressing an interest in a type of rap which is actually mainstream, which is $1 billion industry. And there's no big deal with this. Killer, lots of people call Killer. I used to break dance when I was young. I used to call myself Killer K. The idea of me being charged, accused of a murder I didn't commit, and then going back into the archives and find out, wow, look what he used to call himself, Killer K. It's clearly a killer. So, I found that abhorrent and I found it frightening. So I had a bit of a relaxed attitude towards it, but I knew what could happen with this evidence. And the prosecution was saying this evidence was a statement to kill, a statement of intent to kill. This evidence shows a propensity to use Mac 10s, to use 9mm bullets, to ride to a mission, this kind of things. And it was clear to me that the prosecutor had never even heard of rap, let alone listened to it. And you've got a concern about the judge, but don't forget, the judge doesn't rule on facts, the judge just rules on law. So that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the jury. Now, I trust the jury. I trust the jury very much. But you just don't know who you're going to get on a jury. And you don't know whether they're going to know about rap lyrics and it actually being a simple genre, everybody rapping about violence because that's what sells, that's glamorous, that's what's exciting. So you have to think to yourself, well, can I trust the jury? Or do I need a mechanism of explaining this evidence to the jury? Well, clearly the answer is I need to find a way to explain it to the jury. So I thought, so what am I going to do about this? I can't give evidence. I can do a speech, I can mention things like Quentin Tarantino. We're going to say, well, he's written so many violent films, so many violent scripts, he must be violent. And hopefully the jury say, yeah, actually, this is crazy. But Quentin Tarantino is Quentin Tarantino. He went to university, he's got a college degree. My client hasn't done any of those things. So then I thought about getting one of my other clients who's really into hip-hop, or one of my mates who's really into hip-hop to give evidence. I thought, no, that's going to lack credibility. So then I did what I usually do when I need to find out. So I went on Google and I found Dr. Anthony Quinn. And it was amazing. And I remember discussing with my business partner, Emma Lambie. We found this obscure expert in rap at Manchester University.
You mean worldly?
Well, obviously now you don't know how I like to search. Anyway, we found her and we called her, and she'd never given evidence at the criminal trial at that stage, and I did my best to convince her it'd be all right, it's fine, it's only the Old Bailey, no problem at all. And she gave us a quite brilliant report, absolutely brilliant report. And not only, we wanted to emphasise to the jury that actually this is a genre, this doesn't mean anything. Writing about violent rap is nothing. We wanted to make that point to the jury, and Ethne provided us with a brilliant report and a really good evidence to support that. But she also helped us in the sense of just completely stripping the lyrics to bits and showing actually these lyrics are completely irrelevant to this offence. I mean, first of all, riding on a mission. She compared it to the game Grand Theft Auto, and the whole concept of that game is to ride on a mission and go on a robbery or do these kinds of things. But we've all heard it in rap songs, we're riding on a mission, riding whatever. Now, you watch the videos, you don't see the rapper riding on a bicycle when he's talking about riding on a mission. You see him in a big 4x4, a big pimped out car or something like that. So she helped us with things like that. The Mac 10 and the 9mm references in the rap lyrics, again, she provided us loads of raps, 50 Cent, Fully Loaded Clip, Murdering Dr. Dre, I've got them all in, Bust My Gun, Sunday Morning, all these things that were referenced in these raps. Mainstream rappers talking about 9mm, talking about Mac 10s. Are we to really say that they have a propensity to use Mac 10s and 9mm, you know, just because they've rapped about it? No, of course not. So she helped with that. Also with Killer, many rappers called Killer. I think Cameron's known as Killer. There's Master Killer from Wu-Tang Clan, Ghostface Killer as well. All these kind of things. Killer K, of course. Yeah, so she helped us with that. Also with things like, within the rap, you'll see he's talking about different types of violence. He's talking about things occurring on a Sunday, Monday. This crime was committed on a Tuesday. So all of these things were there to assist us in making a legal argument, because what we needed to do was to convince the judge that actually, before the prosecution opened this evidence to the jury, this evidence should be excluded. Now, the prosecution said that they accepted it was bad character. I'm not sure what you think about that, but you know, the definition of bad character is misconduct, reprehensible behaviour. Now, we all seem to think, well, we all think that's probably crime, okay? But it's drafted wide to encompass conduct which becomes crime later on, I guess, right? And things develop, different acts become crimes. But the bottom line is it's reprehensible behaviour. So, is rapping about lyrics that are violent, rapping in a violent way, is that really reprehensible behaviour? Well, the judge agreed it was potentially. So they've then got to go through another hurdle. They've got to show that it's relevant to a mattering issue, and they were saying that it showed propensity to use that type of firearm, to ride to a mission, to kill. And we went through all the evidence. We said, well, actually, this is just a pure rap. It's got nothing to do with the facts of this case. And the judge said, well, I'm afraid I believe it does. It's clearly relevant, and unfortunately allowed the evidence in. We, of course, wanted to show that it was prejudicial, because once the jury got a hold of this evidence, the prosecutors are going to say indirectly, look what he raps about. Look what this kid raps about, this young 17-year-old. Look at his violent lyrics. He must be violent. Of course he must be violent. Now, that's not a proper way to deal with it. There's a legal way to deal with it, but they could easily circumvent that to get their point across, and impressionable jurors might buy it. That was the problem. So it went in before the jury. We called Anthony Quinn to give evidence. The prosecutor came up with a load of names of rappers who've been shot dead, you know, to show that there's a connection between hip-hop and violence. Tupac, Biggie, all kinds of rappers. And Dr. Quinn gave evidence of loads of rappers who had college, university degrees, who were family people, who were good people in the community, all these kinds of things. And it was just tit for tat between a very, very senior Treasury counsel from the prosecution, now the common sergeant at the Old Bailey, the second judge in command, very senior person indeed. And it was like watching a boxing match between a very senior Treasury counsel and Dr. Quinn. And I have no doubt whatsoever that without Dr. Quinn we wouldn't have been able to take the sting out of that evidence, and we did. And he was convicted ultimately after hours and hours of deliberations, but I can tell you now it would have been minutes of deliberations had we not had Dr. Quinn on board. And we went to the Court of Appeal, we got leave. The judge said the evidence was at the borderline of admissibility. Can you believe at the borderline of admissibility? We got that close to getting the conviction quashed, and they wouldn't have been able to go again. They wouldn't, because the identification evidence was so weak. The Supreme Court I've tried to go to, but you've got to get leave from the Court of Appeal, which is very difficult. They're not going to give leave against the decision that they've just made. It didn't involve a point of law of general public importance, although if there were more cases involving rap lyrics, I think I could have got home on that point. But it just isn't the number of cases for me to be able to say to the Supreme Court, well, this is of general public importance. You know? There aren't people marching in the streets about this thing. So I then went to the European Court of Human Rights, and they gave me a flat no, and I didn't even get the reasons. They don't even have to give you the reasons for it. So my client, 8 years later, he got a life imprisonment. with a 19-year minimum term recommendation. Because he's a juvenile, normally you get 30 years for a murder with a gun. And yeah, he's stuck in prison, and you know, I had to have that conversation where you tell him, I'm afraid it's the end of the road. The worst kind of conversation you can have with a client. But there's just no more I can do for him. The other kid, there was another kid there who didn't even go in the premises on the outside, who was offered a deal to plead guilty to possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, in the sense that he was encouraging the government to carry. They offered him that deal. He said no. I was there. I didn't know it was actually going to happen, and he was convicted of murder. So yeah, and we got the same sentence. So that's been my experience of a case hands-on. There's been other cases, and I've noticed in the Court of Appeal judgments a lot of rap lyrics being used in cases without any challenge. So that's a big problem, and it's something that defence lawyers need to be aware of more, because the benefits of calling an expert can actually just take the sting out of this evidence is huge. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, if I was going to add, I'm seeing a lot of texts involving, in drug cases now, I'm seeing a lot of texts, not necessarily rap lyrics, but more language and urbanised language used in text, and you get an expert saying, well, this text means this means text and this. And I had one recently where they kept using the word, the term WAG, W-A-G, number 1, and kept texting WAG 1, kept texting WAG 1 too. And the drug expert said, this is a code name, WAG 1. And I was like, are you serious? I went to my client and said, WAG 1, you're Jamaican, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah, so you're just saying, all right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Oh, okay. It was great fun cross-examining that. and thank God I had someone on the jury who were WAG 1. Okay. And I will never forget it. Never forget it. All right, so that's it. That's all I can say, really.
Brilliant. That's great. Right, so we're going to, those were two really fascinating points. So I'm going to open up to any questions. We've got about half an hour.
I have one right away. You said you've noticed a number of these cases here in the UK where rap lyrics are being used. Ballpark, how many would you say that you're aware of?
Okay, in practice, about 3 or 4.
Okay. In
the Court of Appeal judgments, which I actually searched last night just to double check, see if there's anything new that's come up. 4 cases involving rap lyrics, and the 2, one of them was called Edwards, and it involved more of a confession type evidence, which actually is fair. I think it's fair and proper for the prosecution to be able to rely on rap lyrics that actually confess to the crime, or at least give evidence of a motivation to commit the crime. If you're naming the individual that you want to shoot, or something along those lines, or a gang you want to attack, then that's clearly admissible evidence, and it's fair and proper for that to be admitted. The problem I have is when it's just a generic rap that's being used unfairly against the defendant.
So if you've seen 3 or 4 yourself in practice, potentially this is happening. It's extensive here.
I wouldn't say it happens, but it's nothing like America.
No.
Nothing like America. And it's not a something, when I'm talking to my fellow colleagues at court and asking them about things, it's not something that's being discussed widely, openly, and that may be a problem. For all I know, there's been lots of cases and all of the defendants have pleaded guilty.
Right.
And nobody knows about them because they've got their time, and the media can't be bothered to comment on this. But it may be a really, really big problem, but I like to think I do keep my ears to the ground and speak about these things. And I've seen it a few times come up and people mention it. And then the Court of Appeal judgments that I looked at last night clearly had a reference to rap lyrics.
Interesting what you said, Khalid, about the importance of the expert evidence, because obviously I, like you, was like, oh gosh, this is a bit unusual, I need someone that knows, did the same Google search, came up with it as well. The difference between the civil case that I dealt with and the criminal case was, we got the report, excellent, would have helped us, but the judge wouldn't allow it. The judge said, I do not need an expert to assist me on this matter, because obviously the expert witness is there to assist the court. We don't have a jury. So he wouldn't allow it. He said, I'm quite capable. I mean, this is, you know, I say too much about the judge, but he's in West London, not where our gangs are from.
No.
And,
no.
you know, he's got, I don't know how much gang rap he listens to, but he decided that he could decide on those matters. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting whether you think it's better for a judge on his own or a jury to consider this kind of evidence.
Even worse for a judge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely even worse. You know, the jury, you like to hope, are us, representative of the community. You know, the only problem I have is you just can't, my experience tells me you can't trust a jury in the sense that they're going to get what you're delivering. And if you can get a better way of conveying what you want to deliver, i.e. an expert, then go for it and don't take the risk. But with a judge, you know, unless he's telling you, unless he's showing his iPhone and his playlist, I have real concerns about it.
Uphill struggle. I'm not sure how much he really knew about the music.
But a judge could do that in a jury trial as well. He could say, well, look, actually, the jury, this is not expert evidence. We don't need opinion evidence. So, this is clearly within the territory of the jury. The jury listens to music, I'm sure, and can understand this point. We don't need an expert. But our judge was actually good in that regard, and I think we looked at it for, gosh, rap lyrics, I think I'll let the experts deal with that. And I think you get that in the Old Bailey. They're really fair in the sense that they'll try and let all the evidence go unless it's really prejudicial. So yeah, that's my experience.
Both fascinating, both appalling, and I remember the first time I heard them talking about this, how extraordinarily frightening it was that this was happening. But it did, I mean, as I heard both of you talking, there's one thought that keeps coming back, which is, of course, that rapism as a genre has clearly exploited that sense, I mean, as a marketing strategy, the sense that those who perform it are, as it were, speaking from the truth of the street experience. I mean, that in a sense is the way in which the genre presents itself, in the way that if you were comparing, you know, Randy Newman sings against short people, right? And nobody's thinking that in some sense represents what his true view is of people of diminished stature. I mean, and this has to do with the way the genre works. Now, is there something actually working here? It's not just about how legal interpretation works with something like that. I mean, the over-literalization of the lyric. Yeah. There is also, you know, the conventions of the music industry playing into these trials, and in some sense, the industry itself has in some sense created this problem. It's not ultimately responsible for the way courts and juries are responding, and lawyers are using it. But it does seem to me that there is a story here too, isn't there, about how the industry has presented a genre as if it were confessional, and sold itself on the fact that it was more confessional, more true than other forms of musical expression.
So yeah, I agree. There is that tension created partly by the music industry itself. I acknowledge that. My response to that was, well, I'm not arguing that categorically all lyrics should be excluded all the time. I certainly recognize that there are instances in which, you know, we probably fairly have to admit the lyrics, right? That maybe, right, there are instances in which we literally are talking about actual authentic behavior being manifested in lyrics, and I recognize that. What my sentiment was, and I think clearly what you picked up on, it's the same time, I'm always amazed by sort of the genesis of ideas and how things are both literally evolving on different continents, right? But in any event, the use of an expert to at least contextualize and help folks understand that your gut reaction, that authenticity, autobiographical depictions are the norm, always, consistently, without question, without criticism, needs to be contested. And the most efficient way, effective way to do that is through a formal, trained expert and scholar. So I recognize that tension, but I think what we're constantly trying to push back on is that taking that conclusion to the extreme without some critical inquiry. And I think I heard you say this, and I think that's right. I mean, I'm not going to fault the musicians, or the industry for doing it, right? They are not responsible for how ultimately the music is interpreted by the courts. right? I'm not going to suggest that they have to necessarily alter their behavior in order to. It is certainly one way to avoid this, but I am not going to suggest that that is what needs to happen. I think the legal system needs to respond appropriately rather than, right, to force the solution outside to a particular artist or to the industry. But yes, there is that tension. I get it. I acknowledge it, which is why, my initial was like, categorically exclude them all the time, right? First Amendment, for us, free speech, or something else. But this is where I moved from criminal defense practitioner to scholar. I tried to be slightly more objective, but then my hat was, what would I have done? I would have wanted an expert. You find your experts. You find your experts. That gives you at least a fighting chance.
I like your question though about the industry. I think the industry, I think it's encouraged almost to engage in the criminal behaviour, and then that just dominates the public's perception, I think. I had a client, very famous client, I can't name him. I'd love to, but I can't. And he's an R&B stroke kind of hip-hop singer. He didn't really rap, but his lyrics...
Why don't you break into song for me?
Yeah, I know.
Just hum it.
It is a huge song.
Huge, catchy, fusion, R&B, hip-hop.
Maybe off record later, I might hum the tune.
Bring drinks later.
But the chap, I think it was a minor offence, and it was involving the police. Yeah, just a minor offence. But he ended up in court, and he was more concerned about the media being there, making sure they picked up on it, than he was about actually getting acquitted. And he did get acquitted, but it was more or less when we were coming out of court, it was more or less, who's here, what journalists are here, what's going on, can you tell me who's here, and a big people went, no, I'm afraid it's just the metro. And I thought to myself, and your question has just triggered that memory, and I never forget that, because I thought he was actually more concerned about getting some good media.
But that's because he was facing a minor charge. If he's looking at 30 years, he's probably a little more nervous about the conviction, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Maybe a little bit more nervous, but depending on the artist, a little.
Right.
Absolutely. But I could see that him being involved in another crime would be good for business, and he wanted more and more people to hear about it, which is the problem. We need more rappers out there, like, I don't know, like Common or Mos Def, people who actually have more, family people, a different view of rap, showing that, we might rap about something violent, but actually our values are decent. And then, again, we can take this thing out of this.
So interesting, right? If you think about it, many of them, I talked about economic mobility, their values are actually quite mainstream, right? If you want to see manifestations, right? You've got Ice-T, Ice Cube, right? Earlier in the career, Dr. Dre, right? Now we've got Jay-Z, right? Talking about, right, essentially gangster lifestyle. If you look at them now, they are quite, right, publicly very different people. I mean, I always remark that Ice-T is playing a cop on Law and Order, right, and Ice Cube is doing kids movies, right? They aspire to, and I think Ice Cube talks about, he aspired to mainstream values, a life, a family, right? Snoop, talks about, right, he's raising his family, he's a family man. This was their way to do it, and so it's interesting. Gangster rap artists, they are actually aspiring to mainstream values, but this is the way in which they think, or the limited means in which they are given access to do it. And so I don't actually know, there might be something for our experts to think about, or our lawyers to think about with our experts in sort of
that's really
making that
point.
argument.
Really good point.
Yeah, I was just sort of quite disturbed by this, really, because essentially what we're talking about is criminalising an art form and criminalising a form of cultural expression. And actually what we're really talking about is criminalising an urban art form. I mean, in the last century, jazz was also prohibited, and
flamenco, but
exactly.
That's what I'm looking for. So it's like all these genres are taken as music from crime areas, but which basically what I think were rather poor areas where there were just little group of people who are people who are dealing with crime, and then the rest was like poor people who lived in the same area, and those people and the music of them was taken as the same, like the same thing, and I think like some of the music is just describing what people could see rather than it was really the evidence. And I'm like, my question is if music of like the crime is like really something what it's exists, or it's rather created by people surrounding. So sorry for interrupting.
We're working together. So sort of following on from that, rap to be used as evidence, almost as sort of some sort of autobiographical, autoethnological evidence, assumes that there must be some sort of inherent violence in the artists for that to be used as a legal artifact, because we're not using Quentin Tarantino's films in the same way. So we are actually distinguishing between different artistic forms of expression. So I think it's really quite worrying that this sort of predominantly black form and commercialized black form of artistic expression is actually being criminalized along with other, I guess, areas of black life. And I think we just need to kind of take a step back and say, well, why are we actually entertaining the idea that this can be used as evidence in the first place when other forms of artistic expression aren't treated in the same way?
So I know we have a question over there, but I wanted to respond to that, but maybe also come back to a point I thought of earlier with respect to you. One of the questions we're often asked is, well, are there any other genres that are treated the same? And the answer is always no, we can't identify any other genre. The natural one that comes to mind, at least in the US, is country music. In terms of sort of the notion that artists of country music are essentially reflecting their communal experiences, their personal experiences, their collective experiences. We talk about that in rap. That and artists,
ballads being covered.
Right. You know that artists are not just talking about their own personal experience, but might be talking about the communal experience or the collective knowledge. And so you would expect to see that in country music. What I don't know, because it is hard to necessarily document what's happening really at the ground level, is whether or not, if we, went down into, say, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, or any of those localities that are hotbeds of country music, that filter down not just from professionals, but to everyday folk, whether we could find any instances, and that's like a source problem. Historically, I would think blues is another one of those musical genres that in that era you would have seen similar treatment. But in my research, my historical research that I talked about yesterday evening with the students, maybe one difference I see with respect to rap artists is because it is a musical genre that maybe unlike many others does not require formal musical training or musical training, right? You can be a relatively untrained artist, right? Not to say that there are not those that are not highly trained, right? But it is an access point against its mobilities that someone with relatively little musical training, artistic training, can actually access it. And so that's what you've got. You've got this group of individuals in these impoverished circumstances who can have access to this particular musical genre. You don't have to know how to play the guitar or the piano, right? Maybe you know how to DJ, maybe you don't, but you don't have to. But they have access to this relatively possible means of economic mobility. And so if you add in that particular factor, that might be another factor that's contributing to why this particular genre as compared to others. The country artist, maybe it's just simply a lyricist, but maybe a vocalist, right? You don't have to be a vocalist to be a rapper, right? You can just take pen to paper. This is why we talk about poetic constraints, right?
But that's slightly a mirage in terms of devaluing the art of the aesthetic, because if you're a classical musician, for instance, obviously you have to learn to play an instrument. But if you're a rapper, obviously you have to learn how to rap. There is an art to that. But more importantly, the art is in the production of the track which sells the rap. So even if you are doing it in your bedroom, you're still having to have a certain level of technical ability to put the track together, because rap tends to be rapped over a beat. It's not really kind of spoken poetry in the sense that you don't really need a beat. It has a beat. Those beats need to be produced. So that production is the art form and is the technical skill.
No, I absolutely agree with you.
But it's not perceived as such.
It's not perceived,
and that's the question.
Okay, Can I take three? I've got three waiting questions, so can we hear them all and then we'll get the answers?
Sure. I was actually really intrigued to find out a bit more about how the evidence is submitted in court. So you alluded to it, saying law enforcement officer read it out, which, I mean, I'm a music studies scholar, so I'm perhaps hypersensitised to rap as an oral phenomenon as much as a visual one, and I'm guessing in the courts there's a kind of bias towards visual things, and things being recorded and written down makes them submittable, whether it's in a music video or on text or whatever. But a lot of the aesthetics and the poetics and how rap is learned, how it's part of the culture, is as a sonic oral phenomenon, it's music after all. And just a follow-up point is that in terms of the relationship between music and this kind of discrimination of a particular kind of urban culture, there's been some great work on copyright around sampling practice. So there's a film called Copyright Criminals and a book that follows that up, looking at the institutionalized racism against sample-based music as opposed to other kinds of sampling in, for example, high art culture. So just two things to think about.
Yes, sort of following on from all of that, I'm wondering what you all think about the notion that to really understand what's going on, we don't actually need to look at the lyrics so much, but at the identity of the person in the doc, in that they're black and they're poor generally, and that's kind of what's crucial. I mean, what I would say to my students is, I've got a little sister. When we were growing up, she'd annoy me, and I'd say I could kill her. And nobody would for a second assume that I mean that literally. Nobody believed that Johnny Cash literally shot a man in Reno just to see him die. But when you change the identity of the person in the doc, then this all of a sudden becomes something that's possibly believable. So to me, I think it's, I'd like to know your thoughts on that anyway.
Yeah,
sorry,
just what follows on from that. I was actually just going to ask the question if anyone had defended for example, a white British young man who'd got similar lyrics on a phone or have you seen on from what you were saying there. Also, I wondered how many joint enterprise cases are now using this kind of evidence for maybe not so serious offences as a fatal shooting, but I have colleagues in our department who are just finishing a big report for Barrow Cadbury's Trust around joint enterprise, and they couldn't come today, but they did say that a lot of the cases they're looking into for joint enterprise, rap lyrics are part and parcel of it, so I can pass on their details. And then just a comment really is, I've never been a youth worker, but doing research with young people for most of my academic career, when you go to youth organisations, in terms of diversionary projects, what is always held up as the beacon is, well, the kids love doing music, they love seeing and put any kind of music thing on because that's what they like doing. So in a way you're criminalising something that actually is being pushed for these young people as something that they should be doing to become better citizens, or so that's more of a comment really, and I just wondered what other people thought about that.
I just have a tiny adjunct to that question as well, which is I'm interested in schools now. Probably those in the States don't know that schools now have a responsibility to teach something called British values. And I'm really wondering when you've got your youth workers who will have a similar responsibility, how rap is going to work in that. Because in fact there is another form of poetry, of art that someone's being prosecuted for, which was the woman who was done for terrorism based on her poetry, solely based on poetry. So that there's a kind of whole other thing going on in a sense about the censorship of expressions. But sorry, you should answer the other question.
Legally in the UK, I mentioned about reprehensible behaviour. That's the test for bad character, all right? And that's supposed to be criminal offences. Now, the judge in my case said that rapping like this was reprehensible behaviour. Judge was wrong. Simple as that. Judge was wrong. Okay, and the Court of Appeal looked at that, and they didn't really focus on it too much because they felt that despite the rap lyrics going in, he gave a pretty neutral direction. We had the evidence of Dr. Quinn, and whilst the identification evidence was a bit flaky, it wasn't so bad to render the conviction unsafe. All right. So the judge basically saying that probably shouldn't have let the evidence in, but it's not so bad that we're going to render the conviction unsafe. And that's the test. If there's still some evidence upon which a jury could have convicted, you're not going to get it overturned. You need a really good, solid point. In terms of joint enterprise, a good question.
Can you explain what that is?
Right,
the ignorant
I can, yeah.
American?
That case, Callum, was joint enterprise. There were two
It's gang
cyclists.
stuff.
All right, yeah.
Conspiracy.
Ah, technically.
Well,
yeah.
It's not meant to be guilty by association.
Okay.
Joint enterprise is for example, I lecture a lot of people, kids, about this, and I'm about to do one because I coach basketball, and I'm about to go to Lewisham and do something for the under 12s up there. If you're with a group of people, and some of you should tell your kids, if you're with a group of people and one of them decides to have a confrontation with an individual, and he has a knife on him, and he ends up using that knife to stab the individual, and the individual dies, then the other people who are present are potentially complicit in the sense that they are part of a joint enterprise. Their presence is encouraging the male to use the knife. Now, the only, and it's frightening, because you might not want that male to use the knife. But you could still end up in the dock at the Old Bailey being tried for murder. And the test is, were you aware he had a knife? Could you foresee that he might use it with an intent to cause GBH? That's all you need. That's the intention. That's all you need to convict someone of murder.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that might happen, you remain. All right, so that's all they've got to prove in terms of your mens rea, what your state of mind necessarily to commit the crime. Now, of course, they've got to prove as a fact that your presence did encourage the individual, and you can make a speech to the jury, you could cross-examine the particular, if the person doesn't plead guilty, you could cross-examine them and say, well, you would have stabbed him anyway, it didn't matter who was there. But he probably isn't going to give evidence, he's probably going to plead guilty, so you don't have that luxury. So then you've got to try and make a sale to the jury of, well, come on, the prosecution hadn't proved that the presence, in fact, encouraged the knifeman to use the knife. But that's a really hard sell, because the jury will think, oh, he should have run away. Shouldn't have stayed at the scene. That was silly. And they just don't, I've got to be careful in my words, but some jurors just don't understand that that's not life. You could end up in a situation and just freeze. Or you could be in a situation where you don't want to leave your friends because you don't want peer pressure at school the next day. You don't want them all calling you a chicken and saying you're not one of them. You might just remain not wanting anything to happen, not believing your presence is encouraging someone, but tough luck. You're there, joint enterprise, potential conviction for murder.
It's
So,
been used in Greater Manchester a lot with so-called gang members.
and the rap lyrics is coming in, but not in the sense of my case. All right? What they're using the rap lyrics for, and I had this in a case, in a murder case a couple of years ago, where they were putting videos on YouTube, and they were rapping on YouTube, dancing, and it was all to show gang affiliation,
Yes.
which then makes the connection to the joint enterprise, gang, the rapping. And
So I was going to ask you whether you have what we unfortunately have in the U.S., which is essentially conspiracy law. So it's not this act of facilitation, it's a membership in essentially a criminal enterprise, and then the enterprise is engaged at least in the minimal level of criminal activity. So your membership in the organization, even if you have not been present in any criminal activity, if you have not actually engaged in any criminal activity, is enough for a conspiracy charge, and then you're ultimately responsible for whatever the whole group does. We've actually seen this manifested in probably the worst case most recently in California of a tiny dude who's an artist who merely rapped about, you know, his friends, his affiliations, you know, whatever, he might have signaled some gang affiliations, but yet it was clear that he had not at all been involved in any criminal activity.
That he had no knowledge of it and had no role in planning it.
Yes.
Which the prosecutor stipulated to.
Yes, and he was charged with essentially being involved in a continuing criminal enterprise. Ultimately, for him, he was fortunate, right? It was later determined to be that the case against him had to be dismissed because essentially that was criminalizing mere membership in an organization, possibly, and the lyrics would have been the only link to establish membership. All right, and so the court, right, threw out the case against him.
I don't know that they were even going to do much with the lyrics. They were actually focusing on the cover. Their argument was that because California, which is ground zero for a lot of these gang prosecutions and these gang enhancements, which will take a 2-year charge and turn it into a 15-year charge, their theory with him, this was the scariest one I'd seen, that's a great, was that he was going to take the full weight of this murder charge or attempted murder charge because he made a rap album. And one of the arguments they made was that although he had nothing to do with the crime, did not plan it, had no knowledge of it, he would have benefited through street cred and therefore increased record sales because of the violence of this group that they hadn't even proved that he was a member of. And that was one of their arguments. Also that he was just glorifying it, and there's a gun on his cover. I mean, that's really what the prosecutor said in court. We brought a lot of media attention to this, and the prosecutor doubled down, went for it again. Ultimately, yeah, right, it went, but that's where these gang prosecutions go off the rails, even though every time I get a call from California, I say, before you tell, let me guess,
Yes.
and then it's going to be.
So that's why I just wanted to flag whether you have similar statutes which allow even that possibility that your involvement in an organization, you cannot profit from, you can't be involved with it and you cannot profit from the organization's activity. That might be sort of the next.
Well, maybe, but I mean, it's not a crime to be in a gang, all right? It's not a crime. And it's a crime if you're in a gang and you're conspiring to commit to drug deal or to extort money from people or to commit murder, absolutely. But it's actually not a crime to be in a gang, no problem whatsoever. But what they're doing is, and it's an important investigative tool. Let's not beat about the bush. In London, there are gangs and there are turf wars. And if you go and deal drugs on a patch, that gang will come and deal with you, all right? So if there is a murder and there's intelligence and there's evidence to say, well, the person who shot my friend is part of that gang, and the reason why he shot my friend is because me and my gang have been dealing on their turf, that's probative evidence. So then what the prosecution, the police would then do is say, how do we prove that this kid is in that gang and therefore potentially bolster our case for murder? And the way they do that is to go on YouTube and do searches of all kinds of rappers. And I remember clearly I had my friend doing his dancing on there with the gang. It was a gang-related murder and they had him dancing on there. And it was a big, big problem. And it went in evidence and he had to give evidence about it. And he said, look, I'm not in this gang. They're guys who grew up in my area. Yeah. They're my mates. Right. I love rap music. They're good rappers. They're my mates, you know, what they do in their own time is up to them. I'm dancing because I like rap music. So he had to give that evidence. We tried to get it excluded because we knew it was prejudicial, absolutely prejudicial. But while it didn't show a propensity to commit the actual murder, it did show a link with the gang who had a problem with the victim.
Right, we're just there are two people who have, I don't think they have to be points, not questions, because we don't really have the time for a reply, but we've got the rest of the day. Unfortunately I don't, but you've got the rest of the day. So first
yeah, just real quick, Steve, maybe you've got that as well. There's a problem with, if this is a problem that you face as kind of expert, in that if we're saying there's not the kind of idea of autobiography, you know, can argue against that, would somebody else come along and say, and point out all the kind of the verifiable autobiographical elements? So I'm thinking with UK grime, with these kind of beefs between grime artists, where they can kind of name each other, and so that could be shown to be kind of true in a sense. And so then, you know, do you face that as a kind of counter argument to then, you know, that be a problem? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just really difficult kind of taking seriously, and I know we have to, the use of a commercial art form which is based on fiction, because a creative art form, as a sort of piece of evidence as though it were fact. Do we do that with people who play video games or watch films or read books?
You repeat my speech in the Khalid case. It's exactly what I said. You know, with reference to video games is a great example.
And also for the Californian rapper, if he had a record deal and was sort of putting out his music under a label, why wasn't the label being held responsible for putting out the music rather than the artist?
I think that's going to be one of the next steps in this. I think the industry is going to get involved once the industry realizes it could face that it could be held liable in some way for some of this. He wasn't on a label, and in fact, their argument that his record sales would increase was ludicrous. He was distributing them for free.
But ironically, I think if labels did face the charge of perhaps inciting gang-related violence, it might make them more responsible in terms of what they put out and lessen the stereotype of that type of music.
But
That
to
kind of-
underscore your point, I think we can extend the ideological remit of this. Even fiction by black people, which falls under nominally high culture, that too is too often seen by racialized standards of authenticity, that we are incapable of cultural imagination. And I think it's a problem in academia too. When you are a non-white academic, you're seen as performing your experience, not intellectual thought or industry. You know, and that's the kind of broader context by which then hip hop, of course, fetishised.
Okay, you're getting out of control. You want to make last comment.
Just want to add to that point, it's like to sort of introduce the addition to that point, you can make almost anything sound dangerous that it's actually safe, and you can make things that are safe sound dangerous. So, excuse me, the rapper Akala, in one of his TED Talks, he gives these quotes and he asks the audience who are predominantly white middle class people, middle-aged white middle class people, is this Shakespeare or is this rap? So he says a quote, and who thinks it's Shakespeare? They say, yeah, it's Shakespeare, and it's risen through Wu-Tang Clan.
Right, yes.
This next one, is this rap or is it Shakespeare? That's rap, no, it's Shakespeare. So that thing with like what's high culture and what's low culture.
Shakespeare wrote the best gangster.